Welcome back to Spitballin Cards. In today's video, we're talking about buying in the baseball card dip of November and December if you can, or if there's blockers stopping you from doing so. Hype versus performance, what drives modern sports cards. And we want to share some of our mid to low end purchases and what we've been targeting in this offseason. But first thing I want to do before we do any of this is introduce who is here today. We have Phil Filmington. He is the wax extraordinaire. We have Ty Teapot, who has built out the Market Movers database. And we have Jeff Blabnut-Slabin, who has the finest Keston Hero collection in the world. Okay, guys, let's jump into this. Buying the dip. It's not really a secret that November and December generally are the best months to buy baseball cards. Every November and December, after the postseason ends, and after players either disappointed or didn't win the awards they wanted, there's really good deals on cards. But sometimes it's still really difficult to find a good deal of specific players for various reasons, or you might not have the cash. So I want to talk about what might stop someone from doing so, and if you do think there are good deals, or if that's a little bit overblown. Let's start with Phil on this one.
Yeah, I find it interesting because I think a lot of us know this, and it might be the least interesting time to buy cards because there's no headlines. People have moved on to other sports unless truly you're a baseball guy. And by the way, we're talking about modern baseball cards here.
Yeah.
Vintage cards here, I don't think there's really a cycle like there is with modern cards. But I mean, like I've got my searches set, and I think some of these guys have like a solid 1-2 month window. People are preoccupied spending money on more important things. They're spending more time with their family. Somebody like me, I just spent a whole lot of money on wax during Black Friday, so that is cannibalizing my budget. I think one of the challenges I'm having, somebody like Juan Soto, who could get traded soon and possibly traded to a bigger market team, we might have a shorter window with him. And I've got my save searches set up, and the desirable cards that I'd want to be getting into or consolidating into, they're not showing up for auction. And in today's market on eBay, I'm really trying to spend my money in auctions only and not buy it nows, because there is a little bit of probably of a gap in those values given the market and the way it's trending and the way some people are still a little bit in denial with the last few years in the slide there. So, and the same thing with Ronald Acuna, trying to find his Bowman Chrome autograph, a guy that should have a strong market right now because he just won the MVP unanimously, but his market's a little soft. I'm trying to find the right cards and I'm just not able to. So maybe they'll come up, but there won't be ample buying opportunities for any one player that I'm looking at, I don't believe.
The Soto market is really difficult. That's the problem with some of these players. People just hold on to them because they paid more than they could sell it for. Plus, there is kind of hope on the horizon, but there have been some good deals so far. So hopefully you got some of those, Phil. Ty, what's your thoughts?
Well, I'm wondering, Phil, when you're trying to buy Soto, are you buying Soto right now with the intention of flipping when he gets traded, or are you just trying to get out in front of that now for like a long-term hold?
I've got a decent amount of Soto already. I'd be buying some to flip on the news of the trade, or hope I could. But if not, then he's the guy that I PC. Some other players like Acuna, I'm betting on like a ramp up in hype before the season next year. So that window would be a little bit longer, but still hopefully less than 6 to 8 months.
I see. Yeah, I mean, I feel like if it's for the short-term flip, there's plenty of cards in different price points that all could be liquid to sell in the on the chance that he ends up on the Yankees, which we're all pretty much anticipating at this point. But I've had my eye on some things, and I've actually been kind of surprised so far that a lot of the cards I've been looking at haven't really come down. In fact, like Jackson Holliday's Sapphire, PSA 10, PSA 9, both of them, like they've actually been going up, not down. Like I had bids that I just missed on the PSA 9s for in the $80 range, and now they're over 100, 110, 120 bucks. So that's been kind of interesting. I don't know if it's because overall card market has just been steadily declining, like continuously declining, that we're not seeing as big of a dip this year. There aren't many players that are down more than 9-10%, aggregate market movers over the last 30 days for baseball. I expected to see some guys tip off more. Obviously players like Adolis Garcia and Ketel Marte and some of those others have gone down more than that, which we, would have fully expected. But I feel like there hasn't been as much of a dip this year. And then the other big problem that I have every year when this happens is I try to tell myself, okay, I'm going to shift my attention now into baseball, but there is something for me as like a multi-sport fan it's very difficult. Like I'm watching football every weekend. I'm watching basketball games when I get a chance to catch them. And that's sort of where my like mental energy is. And I get that it's not really FOMO, but I just want to like participate in season with the sport. It's the same psychology that everybody else has about why, cards are doing different things. And then there have been some buying opportunities in each of those sports now that the seasons are settling in. So overall, I feel like baseball for some reason isn't coming down as much as I'd anticipated. So I haven't been making any notable, let's call it like short-term speculation purchases yet, but I am continuing to watch a lot of things.
Jeff, what's your thoughts?
Well, I agree with Ty that it doesn't seem like the drop is really there, especially in the areas that I'm looking for. And along with Phil, I'm trying to find a good Soto, but they don't seem to be popping up. So I feel like the people that are interested in a lot of the same cards that I'm interested or that have those cards are still waiting on that news, just like I am. Now we talk about the cyclical nature of this. It always happens every year, but I think what seems a little different this year is that the card market in general has been going down for so long that people are just unsure. And there's a lot of talk about the sky falling. Modern cards have 90% left to fall. All my cards are worthless, etc. There's been a lot of talk about that. So I think that adds an additional layer to, well, how much are things going to go down? A little fear for people even buying in, even if they are down, because the usual hype train that comes after the new year when spring training starts ramping up, will that be there? I don't know. That's a question. So I think there's a lot of barriers to buying still.
Yeah, I think that added fear this year with the overall market and the sentiment. I think you summed it up well, Jeff. I think that's keeping folks like us and others a little more concentrated on picking up the right cards. So if we can't turn them around and sell them in 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 4 months, 6 months, then at least we've got something that even though it dipped, it's probably a strong mid to long-term card if we have to hold on to it. So it's forced me to go out of my normal like concentrated horizons on some players because maybe it's not great practice what I'm doing, trying to stick to just eBay auctions, but I find those to be some of the better deals right now versus trying to pick up cards at card shows. So I've had to deviate a bit away from what I would usually do because of that.
Have you noticed, this is off topic, but kind of still in the same vein of things. Have you noticed that people are more open to trading nowadays, now that the season's over and things aren't quite as liquid as they used to be? Because I've been able to trade more in the off season than I was in season. Is there something there, or is that just because of pure dumb luck?
Well, I'll go. We've been able to make a couple trades, especially on cards that aren't very liquid, cards that don't come around a lot, because it seems like for SPs, SSPs, for Flagship and Chrome, there's a lot of collectors that do collect those, but only like to trade kind of a similar card for them. So to that end, some trades have been positive, but for the other cards, like when we're talking about players, I would love to trade up into a bigger Soto, but I haven't found a lot of people that are wanting to trade down into this market either.
Yeah.
Usually people are looking for cash if they're, some cash contribution if they're going to trade down and they want to get more than what you're getting. That's been my experience.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I agree. So hypothetically, I know we don't want to make this a Juan Soto section. Do you think his prices are a good price if he stays in San Diego right now? Or do you think his prices are only a good price right now if he goes to New York? Like, is there value in his cards in the offseason if he stays in San Diego? I'm not convinced there is.
If he ends up being like a true MVP contender next year, I would say there is. Like if he actually takes it up another notch, then I would say there's value. But that ballpark just makes me nervous. I don't know.
I feel the same way.
Yeah,
I feel the same way.
In Ty, you're assuming performance at that point, so it's not a good price based on all the information we have today. I'm in the same boat.
Yeah.
I think we're all in agreement there. So for me, I'm not making any purchases because of, season playing for plane tickets, doing basement renovations, all those things. And it's just interesting how it feels like everybody has the same exact situation on cash constraints this time of year because of trying to buy Christmas gifts and all that as well. But it's definitely, if you're able to do it, I just watched a Jose Ramirez card I would have loved to own sell for cheaper than it's probably worth right now on auction as we were recording this video. But it is just what it is. Sometimes you just can't pull the trigger, which is unfortunate.
There is something to that, Scott. I think about just, we mentioned inflation in the last episode, and overall that's impacted a lot of people in different ways. And I felt it, I can't believe like my grocery bill now compared to what it was a few years ago. And that's eating into things. And then it seems like a lot of people have just had, home stuff come up or other expenses. I've got, some healthcare stuff. Like it's just, there has been, I don't know if there's some seasonality to that. It's like getting back into the swing of the school year type thing or what it is. But I've been hearing that from a lot of people. So I wonder if that's something to just adding it into the, November, December time of year, that people just have a lot of things that seem to kind of come up, or maybe we put it off through the summer because we're doing other things or we're traveling, and also it's like, I should probably prioritize that. But I'm feeling a little bit of that too, for sure. Right now, I've been also finally finding space, which has really been the biggest time and space to sort a whole bunch of my cards, and just curate and looking at things going, do I really want this, to try to probably move a bunch of those as a big lot or something, so I can get some hobby budget back for some other cool things as well.
Totally.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to say with that, what Ty mentioned earlier, once the season ends, you lose. There's hardcore baseball people like us who followed throughout the year, but like Ty, I also follow other sports. And so when the sport's not on in front of you all the time, I think that's a factor. And it also allows people to look into their collection and spend some time sorting rather than buying like they did all summer when baseball's going on. And I also think opportunity cost comes up more now, because during baseball season, it's at top of mind for a lot of collectors, and you're picking up cards here and there. And now towards the end of the year, baseball's not on anymore, and we've got all these other costs and expenses coming up, and we're really thinking about opportunity costs. Well, yeah, I really want that Ramirez card, but it also means that my going out to eat budget is gone for the month or something. So yeah. I think opportunity cost definitely plays a role in this market.
Totally. Phil, do you have any final thoughts before we jump to the next topic?
Nope.
Perfect. I will say it's interesting as well, because obviously we are in baseball card, all sports cards, we are collectors, and we're very driven by hype. And Ty, I mean, there's probably a level of truth to what you were saying about out of sight, out of mind. Holy cow, I couldn't say that for a second. And we're not seeing all these players do cool stuff, and so it slows down. And it's irrational. We know we're being irrational by not buying right now. We know we're irrational buying into the spring training. And so that brings up the question of hype versus performance. What's more important in modern baseball cards? Because obviously certain players like Ronald Acuna Jr., he had an amazing year this year, and he went up. His cards went up. I'm not saying they didn't, but based off of performance, you would anticipate they would have gone up even more. Even another good example is Julio Rodriguez. He dropped like 30% this year. He had a pretty good year. What was he, top 5 MVP voting? But regardless, he didn't meet the hype, and it just died down, and it was just a performance-based thing. So what's your thoughts on hype being the driving behind card factors like with Jackson Holiday card prices versus performance like someone like Ronald Acuna Jr. who performed well, but he didn't see as big of an increase? Let's start with you, Phil.
Yeah, with me sometimes I do pay attention to hype, and it is the number one driver of card values for a lot of guys that are under 23, certainly for a lot of prospects. But there needs to be some underlying performance or skill set that that hype will continue, because even if they're only performing in minor league games, the performance does have to be there. Even if the competition isn't as great as what they face in the majors, you still want to make sure that they're continuing to improve, filling gaps in their game, and et cetera. So somebody like Jackson Holiday is the guy this year that's going to command most of the attention. Well, more attention than any other prospect, right? Come January, Baseball America's list is going to come out. He's going to be number 1 again. Jackson Chourio probably number 2 on a lot of lists. And there's a handful of guys that you can bank on for that, like, sort of news cycle treatment, headlines, attention, and it'll grow. And what often happens, and maybe this is why I struggle in other markets, because I have just more conviction with baseball and knowing how this will play out, knowing who that group of guys will be. In years past, it was pretty clear it was going to be Bobby Witt, J-Rod.
Yeah.
Wander Franco had his time as well. And
Ellie had a ton this season too.
Yeah.
Cruz had a ton. It was like obvious.
It was predictable. The whole thing was predictable. The whole arc.
He also got better in his first few months in the minor leagues. He took his strikeout rate down, and people thought, like, okay, maybe this is a different player, and maybe he's going to be able to hold a 30% strikeout rate in the majors. I think he ended up closer to probably 40, but that could have been worse than that, actually, for a guy with his raw tools when he came in. But yeah, I mean, for me, it seems like it's a ticking time bomb, and anything could happen with these players, right? It's still a speculative investment, but I just feel like if I hold, I know that between January and March, there's going to be certain guys that are just going to have more interest in them. And that often translates to card values. There could be a whole lot of stuff blocking this. There could be macro factors in the way. Print runs and stuff could change, right? There's always going to be risks. And if this guy falls apart in March, if I end up holding him into March. But yeah, I mean, so I guess to answer the question, both are important. Somebody like Ronald Acuna, once you start to get to like age 25, that's where it starts to turn, where it starts to become a lot more about the performance.
Yes.
And like, what have they shown? And the speculators, the gamblers, the prospectors that were once holding those cards will then turn those over to longer term holders. And there can be a period of softening just because there's not a natural owner of that card. Like, it's trying to find its long-term holder. Speculators are done. They've moved on to the next guy, right? Acuna debuted, we talked about this, not 3 or 4 years ago, 5 years ago, right? So like, that's a long time ago. Who's the next guy? Who's going to be the next guy that goes 40-40? Right now, it's baked in that Acuna will have like something close to a 30-30, 40-40 year next year. The returns aren't there. A speculator is going to want to 2x, 3x his money. With Acuna next year, if he wins MVP, he's probably not going to 2x, right? That's not exciting. So they're moving on to somebody else. But, you know, I like a lot of these guys long-term. And to me, I do pay attention to their performance, and I do have strong feelings about their performance. And I do own guys like Arenado, Machado, Mike Trout. Ugh. And that was based off of performance. What have you showed? Not necessarily what are you likely to accomplish, or what's the buzz factor around you for next year?
I agree. And I will say, so yes, we talked about that hype cycle. And if you're in your first under your first 2 years, usually that's how it plays out, right? Like with Elliot De La Cruz, Bobby Witt Jr., Julio Rodriguez, very similar cycle. But then we see players, and a good example of this was like Paul Goldschmidt in 2022, the beginning of 2022, right? I thought that if he had an okay year, his cards would go up simply because Hall of Fame odds are getting higher and people are going to anticipate that. And that's when his cards would go up. And I was right, but I didn't anticipate him winning the MVP at 35 years old. I didn't see that coming. But then that's where performance can actually help with your values of cards. If you're able to predict trends and buy people who are kind of forgotten and older, you can make good money that way too. So yes, it can happen in both. And most likely you're not going to get the huge prospect returns. But those prospect returns are tougher and tougher than ever to get because everybody saw this cycle. And it's not necessarily that hard to predict. You can lose a lot of money doing it, but generally if you're smart and you buy the number 1 and number 2 prospect, you can make predictable money. But I think that's kind of going away slightly. Would you agree with me there or disagree with me there?
Yeah, one thing I want to talk about is with the market correcting, I guess, which it has over the past couple of years or 18 months, 12 months, especially, it is with exceptions, of course, it's getting back to more of a performance driven market, which is nice because especially like as a baseball fan or as a fantasy baseball player, it's nice when you pick a guy like Scott, like you were saying with Goldie, he came into that situation. You thought his Hall of Fame odds would increase, et cetera, et cetera. And so you bought in and his performance led to his prices going up, and that feels good because you predicted right. And sometimes the market, even when you do predict right, I know you said Acuna's cards have went up, but there's a lot of his higher end stuff that even went down during this MVP year.
Yeah.
And it's disheartening as a fan. You see a historic season, or as a collector, I should say, a historic season, and that still doesn't necessarily reflect in his price. And I think for him specifically, we've talked about it before, that collectors want to see 2 years in a row from him, that he can stay healthy, that he can stay on the field. So there's those elements too. But I would love to get the hobby back to a place, to sort of an equilibrium where player performance does affect the price. If a player does well, his price goes up because there's more interest, and if a player does poorly, his price goes down. I like that aspect of the hobby when it goes along with player performance. So I'm hoping we're going to get there a little bit.
2 questions. Will Acuna's cards actually go up? He has another good year next year. That's question 1. And question number 2, are his cards overall lower or slightly going down just because he has so many rookie cards and is at the future of all modern baseball cards after 2018? So that's the first 2 questions I have based off of what you said, Jeff. So question 1, do we really believe if he has another good year next year, top 5 MVP, that his cards will actually go up that much? Because his cards are already expensive. Like,
they're already expensive. So I would say a lot of that has to do with what Phil talked about, the macro factors, how the market in general is doing. Because if the baseball card market continues going down the way it has this year, then no matter what he does, I think it's going to be hard for him to go up. But maybe he could stay put, and by staying put, he would still be higher than the general market. So if he has another good year, I would say that his cards will stay higher than the overall baseball card market.
But it sounds like there's a lot of risk with Acuna then, if that's the case.
Well, I mean, I think that in general, right. I think there's a lot of risk with everybody, and having a lot of cards has something to do with it. But if you're talking about specific high-end cards or sought-after cards, like his Bowman Chrome First Autos or his rookie SSPs, there is a limited amount of those. So you'd think that just because he has a lot of other rookies, it wouldn't necessarily affect the value of those. But for his mass-produced rookies, yeah, I would say it probably is going to have some sort of effect.
I know Phil has a comment he wants to share. I see him like inching towards his microphone to unmute himself. But if we even look at the Sapphire rookie, right? That card was flat or down. That's a like of 250 to 275, whatever it is. We saw it with the white jersey, the vertical card, the super short print from Topps Update. That card was flat down. And so it's not just the base cards. It's like the rare stuff. And so another question, is it just Bowman Chrome autographs or bust for everybody who debuted past a certain year? And we can talk about that too. But Phil, what were you thinking?
Yeah, or maybe anybody with rookie cards after 2018 or after 2017, excluding Soto. So Acuna and Tatis and others that debuted after 2019, maybe they were just all uninvestable because they have too many cards. And maybe the rookie cards cannibalize Bowman Chrome at the end of the day. You can make an argument there. And if not now, maybe in the long term. So, like, that's why I don't own any Tatis cards, really. It's not because, like, I thought he was going to get injured and do drugs and do stupid decisions, although that should have been a reason, right? I probably would have still owned some, but I was always scared off by the 2019 supply of rookie cards he had, and that scared me away from his 2016 stuff because I thought at the end of the day, you know, it's going to be generally not going to be the same type of buyer always that'll buy both of those cards, but long term, it tends to be similar people. So I can make an argument there. I mean, in talking about Acuna, whether his prices will go up or not. I mean, look at like Pat Mahomes in other sports, Connor McDavid, like players that have been at the top of their game in sport for a number of years and have consistently exceeded expectations. What more does Patrick Mahomes need to do for his prices to go anywhere? So, like, look at baseball. Like, nobody's at that level. Like, Ohtani did it. You know, he exceeded expectations in a few years. He's been injured a lot too. Take away those injuries, then you have a Patrick Mahomes situation, and his cards still aren't going up. Now, that's a different market, and his prices did get juiced. So that's the counterpoint, right? Juiced absolutely to the moon during the pandemic. But, like, when are we going to stop using that argument? Because, like, it's, if we look at the Pareto principle, it's Mahomes and everybody else, even more so than in baseball where you have right now Ohtani and everybody else. Like, football is literally Mahomes and everybody else. Nobody else matters in 30 years. It's just Mahomes. like Josh Allen, Herbert. Football's a game where if you have poor coaching, a bad organizational situation, you get hammered from an investment standpoint. Herbert gets that treatment. He doesn't deserve to be collected because of that. Mike Trout, we can bash the Angels, but they haven't hurt him more than like 15 or 20%, in my opinion. Herbert's been killed, right, Teapot? Like, so is there an argument to be made? This is probably a topic for another episode. I know, Scott, you didn't want me to go here, but is prospecting broken? And is this the beginning of a movement of money from the prospecting game into more proven talents? And you could even look at the 90s market, what's happening there, but also just vintage overall.
Ty, we have not heard from you much. I would say one thought, and I want to hear what you have to think about this. But I will say, like, this is going to be random, but I promise it's going somewhere. But Zach Greinke and Joey Votto, they're basically one true rookie card in 2002 Bowman Chrome, and they're
going where I was going to go.
What's that?
You're going exactly. Thank you. You're going where I want to go. Keep
I'm just
going.
saying, like, those cards, I feel more confident if I had to invest in Joey Votto or Zach Greinke right now than Ronald Acuna Jr. Because I know that those cards will always have a demand because the refractors, there's no autograph version. They have one rookie essentially numbered to 300 or less. It's basically the X fractor to 150, the refractor to 300, and the gold out of 50. That's it. Those are the only parallels. The base are really short printed. Like, that seems safer to me because there's just so many options in modern sports cards. And that's my reason why I like to collect an era that some people find boring. And that's maybe something that's bad with me, but I understand it. So I collect what I understand. Ty, what were your thoughts?
There's a lot. You guys have said made a lot of really great points. Like, the first original question, is it hype or performance? What matters more? And I think when you're looking short term, it is like very much hype. Yeah, whether substantiated or not, very much hype. We saw Ellie De La Cruz's cards go like shooting way up, like well beyond what he was actually producing. Like, he had some really cool moments. He stole every base. Like, he did some really awesome stuff, but his raw numbers really weren't that great. And then they just started going down really fast. And it was suddenly reminding me of O'Neal Cruz a year prior, when everybody was like, look at this giant out on the field who can just like hit the ball really hard and throw really fast. Where have we heard that before? The fact that Acuna's card prices didn't go up much, or in some cases went down, is proof that it's hype, right? And not performance, because if it was performance based, he should have been going up. We saw such a different story a year ago with Judge, and his cards went nuclear. Like, they like 250%ed on some cards and like 100% increased on most, if not all of them. And there was all this hype. There was all this narrative all about the home run record. Ohtani this year had all the hype. He was obviously putting up incredible numbers and doing incredible things, but for some reason Acuna never got that spotlight. I do have to wonder, I know we've talked about it in the past with playoff performance, like how it doesn't generally matter, but if we're looking at Acuna's momentum, if the Braves had actually delivered and had actually made it to the World Series and had actually had done well, and Acuna had been part of that, if that wouldn't have helped solidify some of the momentum into going into next year, like if he had actually done something, maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe it doesn't, or would have helped a little bit. I just mentioned earlier that a lot of those guys are coming down who were in the World Series, so maybe it's irrelevant. But when we stack up cards from generation to generation, if you take vintage and you take today's, it is completely apples and oranges. And I know none of us would argue that. It's totally apples and oranges, because you literally had one card, for certain players. One card, that was it, maybe two. And then now we're comparing it to thousands of quote unquote rookie cards. What I'm wondering is, where does it go from apples to oranges to apples to different kinds of apples? And you mentioned like Greinke and different eras, even if you go back a decade, even if you go back 6-7 years, how many fewer rookie cards these guys had. And it makes me really nervous when you look at the dilution and the distribution of all the parallels across the board, plus the print runs, plus the number of graded copies, and you put all those things into like a mixing bowl, and to be able to try to prognosticate out what's going to happen to the value of these cards long term. The one thing that I can't figure out is there any long-term floor to the current, let's call it the best players from this current era. Let's go like 2018 and forward. is there going to be some kind of a permanent long-term floor? Because that's when this new huge crop of people came into the hobby. And those were the players who were playing and starring and getting rookie cards released at that time. And so therefore they'll sort of carry that momentum forward with a certain floor on their key cards. So that if you were to compare a Todd Helton or a Greinke or whatever to somebody of a similar ilk after their career, like both players are retired 15, 20 years down the road, is it possible that there will still be like a substantial difference like there is today in the prices just because of like the collectability and the nostalgia of an era of like when people got into the cards? That's the piece that I can't figure out, because I sit and try to rationalize it, and I find myself gravitating constantly back to certainly the 90s when I collected, but even to the 2000s, just because of the caliber of the player at those times, and their cards seem so cheap compared to many of the current players, some of whom literally haven't done anything. So that's the like piece that I try to think about long term, and I don't know the answer to it.
I have two thoughts. The first one, the players who have Bowman Chrome autographs are going to easily outsell those that don't. So in Greinke's case, it's going to be hard to have substantial value because of that, in my opinion. The next thing, and whether you like Bowman Chrome autographs or not, it is now a thing. From Albert Pujols to Mike Trout, it is now the card. Like, there's no denying it at this point. It's the card. The Bowman Chrome first non-auto, that's a different story. But the other thing that I do want to point out is going to be, if we go back to specific times, the reason why it feels like these cards are more important is because we're living it. Go read Blowout Forums from 2009 talking about Albert Pujols. Like, go read these different times where people fully expect the players in their generation to be these amazing things. And I do think that while there's a bigger collector base right now, and maybe in 40 years there's another wave of nostalgia, and they'll go buy 20, 25 cards of some guy that hasn't even debuted yet. That's a possibility. I don't think that there's going to be way too many of these cards and sets and everything that I don't think it's going to be as substantial as we're saying. That's just my thoughts, though. That's me being cynical, just because in the moment it feels like someone like Patrick Mahomes is so important, or Justin Herbert is so important. Patrick Mahomes is a bad example. Justin Herbert is so important, but Phillip Rivers was probably better than Justin Herbert overall for his career, or Drew Brees, or whatever. But that's just my thoughts. Phil, do you have anything you want to add?
Nope.
Do you agree? Does everybody agree with my sentiment that I think that right now it feels like these players are going to have more value in the future than they will, just because we're in the moment?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. And the other piece of that, Scott, it's just like how many players peter out. Like, the performance does matter long term. The hype doesn't matter as much long term. The performance does. Like, it's, the perceived greatness of the player, or the actual greatness based on their numbers. As we're all seeing all the Hall of Fame ballots being kicked around on social right now, it matters. And there are so many players who we've seen have these great runs, and 7-year runs, awesome runs. Look at Evan Longoria, like David Wright, like some of these guys, and then maybe they just don't quite do enough to get over the hump to become Hall of Famers, or maybe they just stop playing really well and then their career's just over, and you're like, holy cow, I thought this guy was 30 years old with a 50 WAR and was on track to be so awesome, and then he just fizzled. So there's that piece of it too that we can't predict. I think there's way more guys with tons of money put into them right now who are even in that boat, like on a Hall of Fame trajectory.
Yeah.
Half of whom won't make it. And then their values will for sure come down.
Corey Seager, Xander Bogaerts, Francisco Lindor, all those pseudo shortstop Hall of Famers, not all of them are going to make it. None of them might make it. All of them might make it, but majority of them will not. And it's going to hurt for those that have big cards. Phil.
I mean, yeah, and I remember in 2018, 2019, a lot of people were pointing to like the amount of talent in Major League Baseball, young talent, and how that was great for the sport and great for the hobby. Yes, that could amount to maybe a decade having more Hall of Famers, like what you're saying, Scott. Maybe Seager, Lindor, et cetera, all make it in. But at the end of the day, other than being a Hall of Famer and being an all-time great in the hobby, there's a finite list of generational players by decade. Usually it's one or two. You're compared to your peers, whether it's the MVP, there's only one winner, right? WAR is versus the rest of the league. All of these other advanced stats are versus the rest of the league. So at the end of the day, it matters what you do versus the rest of the league. What Aaron Judge did in 2022, where he had a WRC plus of 200, like that was against the rest of the league. That's what you need to do to stand out. And you need to be that top dog. So whether it's, Scott or Teapot bringing up some good points about how this could potentially be another golden age of collecting, like the 90s benefited Griffey, and Griffey had a whole lot of other stuff going on for him as well. At the end of the day, you've got to outswing and outpitch Ohtani to be that guy, right? You've got to get to that level, or else you won't be remembered long term or cared about from a hobby perspective. You might be remembered from a non-hobby perspective, but not so much from a hobby perspective.
Is there any possibility? I have a quick question. Is there any possibility in your minds that there's more high quality talent? I don't know if this is true or not. I'm just throwing this out there. In football, what we're seeing is, for sure, fewer and fewer running backs having meaningful careers. They're just not. It's proven at this point that if you pay a running back significant money, unless his name is Christian McCaffrey or something like that, he's not going to be worth it. He's not. Josh Jacobs got a huge contract, and he's like not that good this year. Like you bring in these guys, what they have is fresh legs and a desire to earn a paycheck and a contract young, and then they sort of fizzle out. And I think that's happening in other positions too in football. So here's my question. In baseball, is it possible that there is like more and more and more high potential players, or even like players that are actually good now, who come in and sort of force other crop of talent like out sooner out of baseball, like into relevance, and that we would see a situation where 10 years from now we have, even ignore the generational talent, like fewer guys crossing the 50 WAR threshold, like they just have shorter careers overall? Or is that not really a thing? I mean, no matter what, if you're playing well, you're going to play. So maybe that's a weird thought process, but I'm just wondering, is it like people could always be moving on to the next shiny object and not wanting to give big contracts and so on and so forth? There could be a domino effect in baseball, or is that, do you guys not see that as a possibility?
Baseball, I love baseball. And the reason I love baseball is because it's so different than football and basketball. If you take the average Hall of Famer from 1940 to 1960 and drop them into today's game, they'll still be very good. But if you took George Mikan and dropped him into today's game, it would not be that way. And what I'm getting at is baseball is also unique because there's 9 players who all have equal opportunity to hit the ball. And if you put that over the entire league, you have almost 300 players who are going to have consistent at-bats every year, compared to the NFL, where you only have a few running backs that are even given the opportunity to be a good running back or quarterback. So it's so much different than other sports. So there's so much opportunity, especially because we value defense in baseball, and we can actually accumulate that into a stat. There's so much opportunity for baseball players to accumulate value, and it's value that we've basically believed in since the 1920s. And even though the game's evolved, it hasn't evolved that much. While basketball, if we looked at 1920s basketball to today, it's so different. And so what I'm getting at is, I don't believe that the young, players won't ever really push out the older veterans like other sports because of that. And maybe I'm off base, but it just feels way easier to predict in regards to Hall of Fame odds. Plus, baseball players really care about the Hall of Fame. They always talk about that in interviews as a goal they're trying to get to. I would say arguably more than other sports as well.
Well, like starting pitching is like nobody pitches more than 6 innings now.
Pitching is the one example.
Definitely.
That's definitely the one. I don't know when the next Hall of Fame pitcher is going to pitch, because basically any young pitcher, you can poke holes in their Hall of Fame can to see.
That's what it's super, like on the pitching side, it's got super wonky. I don't know how that would happen with hitting, but
Phil.
Yeah, when you start talking about running backs, I started to think about pitching being the metaphor, because you don't have like that lead back anymore. Maybe Derek Henry, McCaffrey. There's a few in the NFL. What they're doing, and like even when you have really solid running backs like Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, like they're getting at most 60%. So I see that being similar to not being able to rack up the volumes like in pitching, where you've got guys pitching fewer pitches, fewer innings than what you had with Randy Johnson. So he had 3 Cy Youngs in a row, right, Scott?
Yeah, I believe so. I can pull his.
And in those, he had
3 in a
over
row.
300 strikeouts in each of those years, and probably went over 270 innings in all 3 years. You don't really see that anymore.
Gosh.
Right.
I see 170. Like very few pitchers go over 200 innings now.
Yeah.
Do you want me to show his baseball reference page? I won't, but he pitched in 271 innings in 1999, 248, 249, 260, and he had 364 strikeouts, 347 strikeouts, 372 strikeouts, 334 strikeouts. And we can even put Pedro in this conversation, but it makes you wonder why. Are they throwing too hard? Like, because Randy Johnson threw hard. Is it just being babied by management? Like we saw, was it George Kirby who had like a little meltdown in a press conference where he said that they should have pulled him before going through the third time? Like, is that just being put into these pitchers' minds at this point? Are we going to vote in the Hall of Fame differently for pitchers if we're looking at like actual peak talent for each generation? Because really, since 2008, has there been a Hall of Fame pitcher that's debuted? You know, we had Kershaw and Scherzer that year, but since then, has there been a Hall of Fame pitcher? Like, I don't think there has been. Not one. And so it is interesting. But maybe DeGrom's that guy. I know he has lower career totals, but we can say he's by far the best into this type of game when he's healthy. So who knows? That's a great point. Sorry, I kind of went on a rant there. Phil, do you have something you wanted to add?
No, I think pitchers throwing harder. There's like relievers now are averaging probably like 4 or 5 miles an hour more than like what they were 20 years ago in their fastball.
Even
there's more guys that can hit 100, so it's that peak velocity as well. And I think they're probably being kind of aggressive on throwing like the sliders, curveballs, and that's probably not good. Maybe they're doing it more than they should. So we have all this data now, right? Like that says like this is their like stuff score on each pitch. So like this guy, if he just threw his slider 60% of the time, then Blake Snell would be more effective. And then so they try to game that, and that might not be good. Like Tanaka had some issues with his forearm for a while, I think.
Yeah.
So that might be some of it. And then the whole development, you know, they're probably throwing curveballs when they're like 9 years old, when they used to start when they were in high school.
Yep.
So that probably isn't good.
All the travel ball, like you're saying. I did think of 2 pitchers that will probably make the Hall of Fame or could make the Hall of Fame that debuted past 2008. Can you guess who they are? One of them is Garrett Cole, 2013. That's all I can think of, because other than that, it's tough. Blake Snell.
They're definitely going to have to change the Hall of Fame metrics for pitchers or what we look at, and there's not going to be 300 game winners. Unlikely to be 3,000 strikeout guys. So yeah, they're going to change, and eventually guys are going to get in to represent this era. But who will
200 game winners are going to be hard to find, Jeff.
Yep.
That's going to drive old heads crazy. My dad is going to lose it when DeGrom gets put into the Hall of Fame potentially. So
yeah, I was never a fan of pitching war, but a good friend of mine, Chad, has told me that over time, pitching war tends to be pretty highly correlated with the guys that get into the Hall of Fame and with greatness. So like they might have to recalibrate that stat a bit more. And you know, the war is an ever-changing formula. They've made tons of changes to the offensive formula. You can look back at like Altuve versus Judge in 2017 and be like, wow, their wars were like that versus that. But then you compare it to like news articles and it was different because the calculations have changed multiple times. So maybe they'll work on something with pitch. I don't know if that's even going to help fix, but yeah, that's interesting to think about.
This goes back to the closer argument. Maybe we're going to see more influx of relievers make the Hall of Fame just because the game's changing. It's all about who was the most dominant in the game in that moment. But I do miss the good old days when Randy Johnson, Pedro Martinez, Roger Clemens were all just tearing it up. That was fun.
So good.
But we're 44 minutes in. We didn't get to our last segment, which I apologize about. We were going to show our fun pickups we've had the last few months. But overall, if you took anything away from this episode, have fun with sports cards. Have fun speculating. Go debate your dad about Jacob deGrom like I do all the time and have a good time. Other than that, make sure you like and subscribe. Any final thoughts from the crew before I let everybody go? Awesome. Well, appreciate you all, and we'll talk to you soon.